Hello and welcome to another video from McDonald English in Cadlet. My name is Andrew and I'm here today to talk to you about modal auxiliary verbs. What we're going to look at today connected with modals will be the definition of modals, a list of some modals, the structure and how they work, groups of modals and perfect modals. To begin with, definition. Modal verbs are part of a verbal phrase. I must get there before 7 o'clock. Must is the modal verb here. They always accompany, assist or help other verbs. This is why we call them modal auxiliary verbs. They add abstract or modal meaning like obligation, permission and advice. Modals. We're talking the verbs here can, could, must, need, should, may and might as examples of modal verbs. We're also going to discuss other verbs like can be able to, have to and ought to, which are not strictly modal. The structure of modals. How do we use them? Well, in the affirmative, we use the subject plus the modal plus the infinitive without to. Example, she should stay. Never, she should to stay. Negative, subject plus modal with not or n't as a negative plus the infinitive, so she shouldn't stay. Never, she shouldn't to stay. Interrogative, word, why, where, when, how, who, plus modal, plus subject, plus infinitive. Why should she stay? Or why shouldn't she stay, if you want to make a negative question. A little bit more on structure. Modal verbs are used with infinitives without to. We call these bare infinitives, with the exception of ought to. So for example, we must get there before 7 o'clock. She should study harder, but I ought to go home now. Have to is studied with modal verbs, but it's not a pure modal verb as it needs auxiliary verbs and has an S in the third person singular. Whereas modal verbs do not add S or ES to the third person singular. They are invariable verbs. So he can swim, I can swim, you can swim, he can swim, we can swim, they can swim. Not he cans swim. A little bit more on structure again. We don't need auxiliaries to form short answers or negative and interrogative sentences. For example, she shouldn't eat salt. Not she should eat salt. Shouldn't does all the work. May I help you? Yes, you may. Do I may help you? No. Another example. They do not have infinitives or ing forms. Canning or to might. This is impossible. Also, modal verbs do not have all the tenses. They use other verbs to complete the tenses. For example, can uses be able to. For example, they can swim now. Can has no future, so she will be able to swim next year. Must uses have to or had to. You must come early, or you had to come early yesterday. Groups of modal verbs. This is where people begin to get confused, so I split them into different groups to ease the understanding. We're going to study them from 2 points of view. A number of meanings or concepts that they express, which can be single or double meaning, and then modal meaning they express, whether it's permission, ability, obligation. So number of meanings. The same modal verb can have different meanings depending on the context. Okay, we can talk about different modal verbs with groups of meanings. The same modal verb can have different meanings depending on the context. So may I come in, or it may rain tomorrow. We have one of permission, the other of possibility. We need to make two categories. Single concept modals, these modals have one meaning. Double concept modals have two or more. These are the ones that are often confusing. So the meanings. Modals express a series of modal meaning like ability, obligation, prohibition, necessity, advice, possibility, and certainty. If we look at ability, we're going to use can, could, and be able to. Can in the present, could in the past, be able to, past, present or future, but remember the be conjugates like the verb to be. So I was able to, I am able to, I will be able to for the future. Or he was able to, we were able to in the past. He is able to, they are able to in the present. He will be able to and they will be able to in the future. But can is the modal, true modal here. Two friends of mine can play the guitar. Or in the past, when he was a child, he could ski well. Remember, modals don't conjugate. Never add an S to the third person. I can play the guitar, you can play the guitar, he can play the guitar, we can play the guitar. He could ski, I could ski, you could ski, and so on. And here are the other tenses of be able to. Next week they'll be able to vote. We haven't been able to go on holiday this year as a present perfect. We would be able to do it, conditional. We can also talk about obligation. We use must. Applicants must answer the questions honestly. I must answer the question. You must answer the question. He must answer the question. But to use other tenses, including the present, we need to use have to. I have to study hard this year. However it conjugates. I have to study, you have to study, but he has to study. I will have to work hard as a lawyer. He will have to work hard as a lawyer. You will have to work hard as a lawyer. Or I have had to stay at home lately as a perfect. Or I had to stay at home as a past. He had to stay at home. You had to stay at home as a past. We can talk about prohibition. We use mustn't to express prohibition. You mustn't eat too many sweets. You mustn't cheat in the exams. To talk about prohibition in the past, we use have to. You didn't have to eat too many sweets when you were a child. You didn't have to cheat in the exams. I didn't have to cheat. It was prohibited. Affirmative, need to, is not a modal verb. You need to do this to pass the subject. She needs to do this to pass the subject. We add the S, so it's not really a modal. Negative, you needn't do it. He doesn't need to do it. I don't need to do it, or I needn't do it. He needn't do it. And in the interrogative, need I do this? Need you do that? Advice, we can use ought to or should and shouldn't to express advice or recommendation. Should is a modal verb. Candidates should be friendly. I should be friendly. You should be friendly. He should be friendly. You shouldn't worry too much about exams. However, should has no past, as it's a modal. We can use it in the future. You shouldn't worry too much about exams next year, for example. You shouldn't worry about exams next month. We can use the time phrase to put it in the future. Candidates ought to be friendly. Ought to be. I ought to be. You ought to be. He ought to be. The reason we don't use ought to so much is because in the negative it's a horrible thing to pronounce. We have candidates ought to be friendly. We could say candidates ought not to be unfriendly. So ought not to be in the negative. It's not very nice to pronounce. Possibility. Present and future. May, may not, might, mightn't, could. Talks about possibility. It may be time for Linda to go. They might choose Danny. They could be on the train. If we use the past, we use may, might and could with have and with a past to make the past perfect. He might have received our message. They might have chosen Danny. They could have been on the train. It may have been time for Linda to go. We can also talk about certainty or logical deduction. We can use must for when we're 100% sure. It must be quite late because it's getting dark. Negative is when something is impossible with can't. That can't be true. We can use them with perfect infinitives. When they refer to the past, certain meanings must be expressed with a modal and a perfect infinitive, so it's have plus a past participle. And again, we're talking about certainty, a logical deduction, positive and negative, possibility, and advice or recommendations. So, positive. Danny must have felt disappointed when he didn't win the prize. Negative, can't have, and past participle. She can't have passed the exam. She didn't study at all. We can use it to talk about possibility. When we talk about possibility, about the past, we use might, may, could, plus have, plus a past participle. They might not have received our message. He may have gone to the cinema. The government could have acted more quickly. Notice here the have doesn't really get pronounced so much. He may have gone, not he may have gone. He may have gone to the cinema. We can use this for advice and recommendation. When we express criticism or regret about a past action, we use should or shouldn't. Linda shouldn't have talked so much. We should have gone to see that film while it was still on at the cinema. It's a regret. And there's a nice picture of all the modal verbs together. You may want to pause the video here and have a look at this. And that's this for video 1 about modal verbs. Thank you very much. Bye.